Your Honor, this is a solemn occasion. This is not politics. This is not theater. This is a serious case that the voters who we represent have brought in order to offer proof that their United States representative seeking re-election, Marjorie Taylor Greene, having taken the oath to support the Constitution, then broke that oath and engaged in insurrection. And in order to understand that case, it's important to set the stage with some history. There have been past insurrections in this country, and we're going to hear about some of them. The most important of which was the Civil War, or as it was called at the time, the insurrection. And Professor Gerard Magliocca, who is one of the nation's foremost constitutional historians of that era, specializing in Reconstruction and the 14th Amendment, will talk about some of that history. What was interesting about some of the differences between these past insurrections is that the Civil War involved states raising armies. They equipped them with uniforms, insignia, state-of-the-art military equipment. They marched in columns. They occupied huge tracts of land. That is not the only type of insurrection that this country has seen. Professor Magliocca will also talk about some of the previous insurrections that were on the minds of 19th century Americans. Those include Shays Rebellion, also known as Shays Insurrection, and the Whiskey Rebellion. These insurrections were of a different character. They were not quite as organized as the Civil War. The foot soldiers of those insurrections didn't march in armies. They didn't conquer vast swaths of territory, and they certainly didn't wear uniforms. That is the kind of insurrection that occurred on January 6th. The evidence will show a violent assault on the United States Capitol that the law enforcement and ordinary authorities were unable to control, that this violent assault had multiple purposes. Those included capturing and executing the Speaker of the House of the United States Representatives, the Vice President of the United States, and other members of Congress. Those purposes also included, and for a time achieved, preventing the certification of the electoral votes for the president incoming, Joseph R. Biden, and the disruption of the peaceful transfer of power. This attack on the sacred temple of our democracy, the United States Capitol, was unprecedented. And to be sure, it was less organized than some of those past insurrections. This was not a case where the leaders were on horseback leading the charge. This was not the type of insurrection where the leaders were standing in Richmond, Virginia, giving long-winded speeches to justify the mayhem. Rather, the leaders of this insurrection, of whom there were a number, were among us, on Facebook, on Twitter, on corners of social media that would make your stomach curdle. The evidence will show that Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of them. In order to understand that, January 6th has to be set in context. It didn't arise out of nowhere. Even before January 6th, as December 2020 turned into January of 2021, there were multiple shifting tactics used by different groups, some violent extremist groups, some nonviolent groups, all loosely coordinating, all with a shared central aim of preventing the certification of Joseph Biden as president. The tactics shifted. The different leaders jockeyed for position. Some were in violent extremist groups, some were elected officials, some were influencers of various types. You'll hear about them. You'll hear about these different figures, some of whom isolated themselves from some of the action with layers of deniability, some more plausible than others. There'll be direct evidence. There'll also be inferential evidence. And that inferential evidence includes coded language. Let me explain what I mean by that. The evidence today does not include surveillance tapes purporting to show that Marjorie Taylor Greene was directing the plotting of the attack. That's not going to happen today. The witness list today does not include a turncoat witness who's going to come and risk their own exposure by testifying that he or she was ordered by Marjorie Taylor Greene to take certain actions in secret. That's not the type of evidence that we are going to present today. Rather, the way that insurrections are organized nowadays is less in uniforms with military hierarchies and chains of command, less with detailed military plans of battle, and more through social media and the mass media. That's the era that we're living in. In many cases, the communications have multiple layers. And anyone who knows a teenager, is a teenager, or knows anyone in their 20s knows that hashtags and memes and ways of communicating among internet subcultures can mean that words that could have one meaning, a benign meaning or even a baffling meaning to large portions of the American public, can carry a very different significance to the people swimming in that particular subculture. So the most important witness today, after Professor Magliocca testifies, the most powerful witness against Marjorie Taylor Greene's candidacy, the most powerful witness in establishing that she crossed the line into engagement of insurrection, is Marjorie Taylor Greene herself. You'll hear her words, of course, on the stand, what she says and what she doesn't say. You'll also hear what she said in the past. Again, some of that will be in somewhat coded or veiled language, but you'll also hear, in some cases, the mask falls, and she shows us exactly what she intended. Now, she was not on the Capitol steps urging the attackers to breach police lines and smash through the doors on January 6th. That was not the role that she played. Different figures within this larger effort had different roles. But what became clear as December turned into January, as lawful means of preventing the certification of Joe Biden were exhausted, as nonviolent, even if unlawful means were exhausted, is that Marjorie Taylor Greene nonetheless played an important role. And her role, even after she took the oath on January 3rd to uphold the Constitution and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, was several-fold. To bring people to DC, again, not by providing trains and buses that would transport them directly, but rather through other means. To contribute in the planning, and to signal that January 6th would be, as she said herself on January 5th, our 1776 moment. A coded phrase with great significance. In fact, it turned out to be an 1861 moment. Instead of violence against a foreign empire, as we saw in 1776, she urged and encouraged and helped facilitate violent resistance to our own government, our democracy, and our Constitution. And in doing so, she engaged in exactly the type of conduct that triggers disqualification under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which is to say, she engaged in insurrection. Thank you.